Additives are like vitamin pills. People take vitamin pills to supplement their diet. Additives also play a role in maintaining the car.
I want them to like the image. I want the image, the art image, to say something to them.
Motoring 91 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil.
Oh, hi there. You know, I came in this store for a set of windshield wipers, but then I started walking down this aisle, saw these great products for the car engine. I mean, these are oil additives, and listen to this. I mean, this one here, world famous, maintains new car performance, increases life. What does this one do? Lubricates and protects upper cylinder and valve areas, wherever they are. This one, the razor's edge, I mean, it goes on and on. These sound like great products, and I do care about my engine in my car. The question is, what is an oil additive, and is it really helping out my engine? Well, why don't we find out by first asking the experts.
Our first stop was the offices of First Brands, distributors of everything from sandwich and garbage bags to North America's best-known oil additive, STP.
Additives are like vitamin pills. People take vitamin pills to supplement their diet. Additives also play a role in maintaining a car. Most people, about 80% of the Canadian population, drive in the cities, and that happens to be the hardest environment on a car. So much like people need vitamin pills, anything you can do to help a car live a little longer, if you will, certainly does play a role, and additives do that.
NASCAR driver Richard Petty knows all about STP. He's been promoting the product for over 20 years.
It must work pretty good. Works good on a race car, and I know it works good in road cars and stuff, and that's the good deal about it, is the durability, is that people, once they use it, they know it's a good product and they come back and use more. It's not a deal that I can help advertise anything. I can't sell anything that's not any good. I can make you buy the first product first time, but after the first time, then if it's not a good product, you're not going to come back and buy it. And the STP's proven itself over and over that it's a good product, so people come back and buy it again.
Now, of course, nobody would expect King Richard to say anything negative about STP's oil additive, but we still don't know what an additive does to your oil. Let's ask the expert, Motoring's mechanic Bill Garden.
Well, different additives are intended to do different things. Some of them contain seal swell that is intended to swell up seals that are leaking and seal up an older engine that's leaking oil. They may be heavily laden with viscosity index improvers to try and thicken the oil and prevent oil burning. Some additives are intended with increased detergency to clean up an engine that's been running with a filtration problem or some other contaminant entering the crankcase. So many of these additives are intended to clean up, some are intended to seal up, and they're usually quite different additives.
But do we need the additives in our oil? For the answer to that question, we dropped in on the Quaker State Oil Company in Oakville, Ontario.
Well, the bottom line is there are no miracles in cans. The big miracle is a proper maintenance schedule. If you do that, the addition of store-bought additives, either to add to your motor oil or in the filtration area, are not necessary. People conceive that there may be additional values. If I have a little bit of something, maybe a whole lot is better. But in the manufacturing of motor oils, they are a very precise prescription, such as you would get from your doctor to take to a pharmacist. I don't think you would change the prescription that you get from your doctor. So inside a can of oil or a bottle of oil, there is an exact formulation. If you start to add others to it, you can take away from some of its vital working properties.
We don't recommend that customers use them indiscriminately themselves. We do use additives from time to time, but it's usually, to be quite honest with you, a sort of a Band-Aid solution. There's usually already an underlying problem, a major problem that needs to be addressed, and we may just be trying to squeeze a few more miles out of that car for the guy. You have to understand that many of these additives are intended to try and repair a serious wear that's already occurred in the engine. The ideal situation is to use quality motor oil, change it regularly, keep it topped up, and never let that engine get into condition where it needs to be cleaned up with an additive or resealed with a viscosity index improver or one of these thicker type additives, because by the time that's happened, the horse is already bolted through the gates. So it's better to start fresh and keep on top of that thing.
Motor oils are good, and if people maintain their motor oil the way they should and under certain circumstances, you may or may not need additives. Again, it's a vitamin pill. It won't hurt, it can only help. And the additives that we use are consistent with the additives that you find in the base motor oil itself. There's nothing miraculous out of it. It's just that they're beefed up. The additives are the expensive part of motor oil, not the base carrier oil.
Maintenance of anything, and especially your automobile, is the ultimate. The best advice today is to change your motor oil at least every 4 months, every 6,000 kilometers. And use a motor oil that is identified SGCD.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
The word stylus means different things to different people. To an audiophile, it means a needle. To us on Motoring 91, it means this. This being the 1991 Isuzu Stylus. Now this sporty four-door sedan is based on the popular Impulse Coupe.
There is a small badge on the dash that says that the handling is by Lotus. This promises a lot, and believe me, the Stylus delivers. The handling characteristics offered by the suspension are superb. The whole setup is tactile and crisp, and yet subtle and surprisingly compliant. Push this car into a clover leaf, and the way it sticks to your chosen line is a real credit to the design. This level of comfort and performance, especially in this price category, is the exception that makes the rule. During the pylon test, the car bobbed and weaved with very little body roll, and thanks to some sticky 60 series Bridgestone tyres, there was virtually no understeer. All in all, high praise for a very deserving setup.
This little 1.6 litre 16 valve twin cam produces plenty of horsepower. The drawback being you've got to operate the engine between 3,000 and 5,000 RPM to access it. Now this in turn means that you get a fair amount of engine noise and vibration, which is a shame because this car drives very nicely.
As I mentioned, the engine produces plenty of horses, 130 to be exact. This power is relayed to the front wheels via a 5-speed manual transmission. The shift pattern and clutch operation are fine. The problem here is that the first 3 gears are very low, meaning there's an awful lot of shifting to do around town. This situation is compounded by the 411 gears in the transaxle. The reason for selecting these ratios is to try to overcome the total lack of low-end performance. In my view, they've still got some work to do here yet. The Stylus features a 4-wheel disc brake system. The pedal is easy to modulate, and despite the lack of an anti-lock feature, the stops are controlled, straight and short. On the skid pad, we recorded stopping distances of 119 feet from 80 kilometers an hour. Typical of most cars with rear disc brakes, the parking brake has to be pulled up tight to ensure the car remains stationary when parked. The dash features a comprehensive set of clearly marked analog gauges. They are flanked on either side by the light and wiper switches. Unlike the other Isuzu products we've tested, the radio and heater controls fall fairly readily to hand. The front seats are comfortable, and thanks to some fairly large side bolsters, they provide plenty of lateral support. The lack of a tilt steering feature places the steering wheel a little high. Other than that, the driving position is very good. As with the driver, the front passenger is treated to plenty of room. The rear environment is a little on the cramped side, but is nonetheless comfortable. The rear seat backs are split and fold down to allow access to the trunk, a handy feature because the trunk is not overly spacious.
These power window controls make up this week's pet peeve. First of all, they're angled away from the driver, and secondly, they're not illuminated, meaning at night you must literally grope in the dark to use them. Anyway, now to the scoreboard for a rundown on the 1991 Isuzu Stylus.
The Lotus-tuned suspension combined with a good set of tyres gives this sedan truly amazing handling characteristics. Rarely do you find such a well-balanced setup. Needless to say, I was impressed. The lack of low-end torque puts a bit of a dent in the overall performance numbers.
We required a little over 10 seconds to reach 100 kilometers an hour. Once you get the engine up over 3,000 RPM though, the performance is fine. The four-wheel disc brake setup provided short stops. We recorded stopping distances of 119 feet from 80k. Unlike the Impulse we tested, the brake pedal pressure required to produce these stops was normal, and there was no evidence of fade towards the end of the test. The overall comfort level of this sporty sedan is very high, provided that is you can put up with the racket the engine produces. Despite the thrashing the engine needs to make it perform, we recorded a very good 32 miles per gallon or 8.8 litres per 100 kilometers. For a small sporty sedan, the Stylus has some very endearing features. The phenomenal handling characteristics and a good fuel economy are but two. Upgrading the sound insulation and revising the gear ratios would make this car a lot more desirable.
Well, the assembly line is continuing here at Quaker State. Now, they put 12 of these containers into one case, and they tell me they can produce over 300 cases per minute. Now, that's efficient. And you know, Bill Gardner is also a pretty efficient guy. Bill, of course, is Motoring's main man under the hood. And this week, Bill tells us that not only does your engine prefer a good motor oil, it also prefers clean, fresh air.
You know, believe it or not, there's still a lot of small items that the average owner can service on today's cars. Checking and topping up the oil, of course, is one very important one, but servicing the air cleaner assembly is another one, and that's what we're talking about today. Now, before you discard that air cleaner element that may be fouled, it's important to note what kind of contaminants we have in there. We can see that this particular air filter is quite black. It's fouled with carbon and exhaust soot, and that filter needs to be replaced. So we want to remove this entire air cleaner housing. We've got to disconnect some of the small parts that attach it to the car. There's several air duct hoses. That was the fresh air one. There's the hot air one underneath here, and a connection for the crankcase breather element, and at least one vacuum hose in many cases. We want to set that air cleaner housing aside and have a look at this area right here. Just inboard of the air filter sits right here. Just inboard of that area, we want to make sure that there's no grit or dirt in that area. If we find any grit or contaminants in here, it's an indication they've already passed through the filter. It's either a poor filter or it's the incorrect fit. In either case, that's a very serious situation that'll wear out your engine quickly. Now, in this particular case, we can see a lot of heavy black soot around the outside of the air filter, and that's come from a crack in our exhaust manifold. Our exhaust manifold down here has a crack in this area, and that exhaust carbon is being drafted up the hot air tube into the base of the air cleaner assembly when the engine's cold and drawn into the carburetor. It's that hot air that helps warm up the engine, but it should be perfectly clean when it enters. Now we can see that the crankcase breather element in this particular car is quite oily and gritty as well, and we've got a gasket problem on this engine that's causing a problem in that crankcase ventilation system. So that needs to be addressed as well, because that's also fouling our air filter quite quickly. Now when you go to reinstall this assembly, you want to make sure that you reconnect all these components properly, including the important vacuum hoses. There's usually a diagram under the hood to help you in this respect. Now when you reinstall that assembly, make sure that when you put that new air filter in, you've got the correct part number. There's usually a number on the outside of the housing to match up. When you reinstall it, take a little bit of clean motor oil and wipe it around the top of the new air filter element. Reinstall the lid and tighten down the wing nuts completely. Then remove the lid, turn it over, and make sure that you have a wet spot from that motor oil that's made an impression on the lid. Then you know that you've got the correct fit and that no unfiltered air can enter that engine. You'll find many of today's filters, aftermarket filters, that don't fit the engine properly, and that can cause you serious problems down the road. So make sure that you have a new, good quality filter on hand, wipe out that complete area, clean it, and reinstall everything carefully. Service item that just about anybody can handle if they just take their time and do it properly. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 91.
I think I've found what I want to die doing. I mean, I really can't see myself going back and working in an office. I think I've probably arrived at my life's work.
looking at some of the different blends of motor oil produced here at the Quaker State plant in Oakville, Ontario. But we're going to leave the plant and join Steve Grant for a moment. And Steve has a story about a gentleman who, well, he blends his own oils from time to time and does spend a lot of time at the racetrack. But he's not a mechanic, he's not a driver, well, here's Steve with the story.
Jay Koka is one of those rare and fortunate individuals that has the opportunity to incorporate his first love with his profession. After years in the cutthroat advertising industry, Jay made the decision one day to just drop everything and become an automotive artist.
I think like every artist, I started drawing as a kid and went through probably 3/4 of my life doing nothing but just kind of drawing here and there and on the side. In the last 10 years or so, I think I started to realize that there was more to it than just a little bit of drawing here and there, that I had a talent that was beyond just sort of a Sunday painter. I discovered art as a full-time career later in my life. I mean, I'm not that old, but a little bit later in my life. I was, I think, around 35 or so when I started the studio on a full-time basis. I think I've found what I want to die doing. I mean, I really can't see myself, going back and working in an office. I think I've probably arrived at my life's work. When I started the studio on a full-time basis about 5 or 6 years ago, I would go through periods of absolute panic. And I mean panic to the point where, what am I going to do next? I would wake up in the morning and the very thought, just the idea of walking into the studio and picking up a paintbrush was one that would, it would literally turn my stomach. At the beginning, I was very scared because I thought to myself, my God, I'm never going to paint another painting as long as I live. But as time has gone by, I've learned to accept this. Maybe it's God's way of sort of recharging you. This particular car is an Alfa Romeo T33 Daytona. I picked it simply because I think it's one of the wildest looking Alfas that I've ever seen. Generally speaking, the way I paint is first I paint the background, then I'll paint the car, and then at some point I've got to bring the two of them together, and I'm just starting that process now. An example of that would be back in here where first I painted the background, then I painted the car, and now I've painted the two of them together.
That Ferrari you're looking at is a Koka, but it's a Michael Koka. Jay's son Michael put that together when he was only 7 years old. When he was 11, he painted this Ferrari. Now, believe it or not, Michael was only 10 years old when he painted this. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was 10, I was still mastering stickmen.
Michael was working in a school project where they had to write a story about the life history of a person that they admired. Of course, in this family, everything's got something to do with cars, so Michael selected Enzo Ferrari as the subject for his story. One of the things that he did to support the story was a very credible portrait of Enzo Ferrari. The interesting thing was that he did such a good job on it that the people at school suggested that he didn't do it, or at the very least he had a lot of help with it. I was very annoyed by that because Michael is a very talented young artist. In terms of raw talent, I think that he has the potential to be a significantly better artist than I am. I think he's more creative than I am. I don't know how in the hell anyone can go on live television. When you know you've got a couple shots at it, you can be a little more relaxed. But I mean, to get on air, could you imagine doing that?
Yeah, I could do it.
Jesus. On air. Because sometimes, you're
But
sitting
to a
there.
certain extent, you only have one take at it too. When you sit in front of the canvas and you're halfway into it, that's your one take.
Yeah, but you're forgetting something. I can always take it and throw it in the garbage, and no one will ever see it. And believe me, that happens.
Ah, nothing like a deep breath of fresh diesel first thing in the morning. How about the bouquet of carbon monoxide? For those who can't appreciate the aroma of the choked city streets, there's the green screen. The anti-pollution mask is fast becoming the best friend of those forced to tail tailpipes. The fashionable but effective mask features a carbon filter, which is replaceable. The face-mounted filter is designed to capture everything, from lead to sulfur dioxide to pollen. Green screen comes in various colors and is also an ideal disguise from predators. If you have any comments or suggestions, drop us a line at Motoring 91, Post Office Box 284, Station J, Toronto, Ontario, M4J 4Y1.
If this car doesn't have a permit to park in this space, then this guy is going to have a job. I'll explain that next on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
Now, the better part of driving is consideration. Now, I don't know if Shakespeare said that, but if they'd had cars in Elizabethan times, I'm sure he would have. And there's no better place to show some consideration than at parking spots marked with these signs. These spots are reserved for handicapped people, and it should be obvious to everyone concerned that people with physical disadvantages shouldn't have to walk a half a mile to get to where they're going. After all, they've got enough problems as it is. Now, depending on the area in which you live, handicapped people either have special license plates or permits like this car has here, allowing them to use these spots. Most municipalities have passed bylaws imposing substantial penalties on people that abuse this particular privilege, and at least one town posts a phone number on these signs which Canadians can use to report violators. Now, I don't much like vigilantism. I don't like people spying on one another, and we also have to be careful about our assumptions. A friend of mine once drove a friend of hers to her office in a mall and parked in the handicapped spot because her friend was in a wheelchair. She helped her friend into the office, but by the time she got back to her car, she had a ticket. She took the ticket to court, but even with the support of her handicapped friend, she still lost the case. Then there's a situation that comedian Larry Horowitz uses. He said he found a handicapped person parked in a regular parking spot, so he beat him up. Okay, that's a joke. But we've got to keep our heads straight on this situation. Let's be fair to the people that have enough problems as it is. Besides, even if you have to walk a couple of hundred yards to get to the milk store to buy a pack of cigarettes, the chances are the walk will be good for you. I'm Jim Kenzie.
As you can see, they make their own bottles here at Quaker State, and they tell me they can produce up to 20,000 bottles during an 8-hour shift. And oh yes, they are recyclable. Well, hopefully we've all learned a little bit about oil this week and oil additives. And it appears the bottom line is there are no miracles. Use a good motor oil and follow a proper maintenance program, and hey, your engine will love you. Well, that's it for now, but we'll see you next week for more stories on cars and the people who drive them.
Motoring 91 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil.